Good evening. Our big focus tonight as Nirmala Sitharaman, the Finance Minister, announces the first of her announcements on dealing with the economy because of the COVID pandemic. Our big focus tonight, the 20 lakh crore question. How does it help small businesses, professionals and the salaried? On the show, India's finest tax specialists. Hitesh Kajaria, Partner Tax at KPMG. Vipul, Jhaveri, Managing Partner, Deloitte. Sudhir Kapadia, Ernst & Young, India National Leader Tax, and Mukesh Butani, founder of BMR Legal. We'll come to them in a few moments from now, but here is what the Finance Minister had to say on a couple of key points, including that point on the cut in Employees' Provident Fund.
In order to provide more take-home salary for the employees and also to give relief to employers in the payment of PF, the statutory PF contribution is being reduced from 12% to 10%. So, for the next 3 months, employers need to pay only 10% and not 12% so that they will have some more money in their hands. So, a liquidity relief of 6,750 crores for both the employee and employer will be available for the next 3 months. We have now, from, let us say, tomorrow till 31st March 2021, reduced the TDS rates and the TCS rates by 25% of the existing rate. This shall apply to all payments, if they are payment for contracts or professional fees or interest or rent or dividend or commission or brokerage. All of these will be eligible for this 25% rate reduction. This reduction, we think, will release nearly 50,000 crores in the hands of the people. There is a collateral-free automatic loan for MSMEs which is being provided. This will give facility up to 3 lakh crores. This will benefit 45 lakh units. Now what we are coming with is a change in the definition of MSME so that they need not worry about growing in size. They will still be able to get quite a lot of benefits which otherwise, as an MSME, they had got.
All right, so what we're going to try and do as we come to our experts is to raise a couple of big questions. And we're going to name all of these 3 questions first. And then after that, we're going to go to our experts and try and get an answer to each of these questions. So let's have that graphic up. What it means for salaried taxpayers. That's question number 1. Question number 2, what does this mean for non-salaried taxpayers and professionals, right? And the third one, what does this mean for corporate? So we are joined at this stage by Mr. Mukesh Butani, Senior Tax Expert. Thanks very much for being with us. Hitesh Kajaria, Partner Tax at KPMG India, also joins us at this stage. Sudhir Kapadia is on, as is Vipul, Jhaveri. Let me come to you first, Mr. Butani. The first question that we are asking today, what does this mean for salaried taxpayers? Your answer, sir.
Well, there is nothing as far as salaried taxpayer is concerned, and even for others, there is no change in the final tax liability. All this gives is an element of flexibility by way of excessive cash flow to the person concerned on whose behalf the taxes are being deducted, which means that if one has to be deducted, now only 75% of one will be deducted, which means that he's got that extra 25 to be able to spend in order for the government to be able to provide an impetus to drive the demand. As far as businesses are concerned on whose behalf taxes have to be deducted, obviously, in this environment, businesses are going through unprecedented stress, which is going to be reflected in their financial statements and hence the profitability of the organization and hence the tax liability. So what will happen if effectively is that depending on what rate of tax applies, now 25% less will be deducted. Mm-hmm. And this is the withholding tax liability and not the final tax liability. This is also predicated on the fact that this particular business on whose behalf tax is being deducted is unlikely to report the profitability as it would have reported on an as-in basis as if the business was usual. And hence, the deduction of tax also goes down, but not correspondingly, not in proportion to the profitability, but from a cash flow standpoint, such that this particular business doesn't land up in a situation where there is excess withholding tax and hence has to claim a refund.
Okay.
So all the changes that have been announced today doesn't mean anything for salaried employees, and insofar as other categories of taxpayers are concerned, it's merely a cash flow facility.
Okay. Mr. Kapadia, would you agree that this is essentially a cash flow facility? It doesn't mean anything which adds to the income one way or the other of those with a salary?
That is true, but it was never intended to be. We have to remind ourselves that the last budget of the Finance Minister...
Mr. Kapadia, can you put your phone down? We can't see you. Yeah, go ahead, sir. If you can just look straight at the screen.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
I'm saying this was, I agree what Mukesh says, but this was never intended to be, today's set of announcements were never intended for relief for this category of taxpayers. The simple reason being that the last budget of the Finance Minister already contained those reliefs by way of an option for a lower rate of tax.
Okay.
I think, as it was very clear, a majority of the announcements today are focused on the MSME sectors and the NBFCs and the HFCs. So, you see, what we have to look at is that the employees of the MSME sectors, which all statistics show is a very large portion, most statistics say is 90% of the workforce, they would get indirect benefit by way of the fact that with these lines of credit which have been announced for the MSMEs, the jobs for the next 2 or 3 months, which were the most vulnerable period, would be protected. And that is the indirect relief which is sought to be given. So I think that was the intent. I don't think the intent was to give any further benefits to salaried taxpayers at this stage.
Right. Okay. Let's therefore move to the second question, and let's have our graphics flag up on the second point that we're looking at. What does this mean for non-salaried taxpayers and professionals? Let's have that plaque up. What does this mean for non-salaried taxpayers and professionals? That's the second point that we are looking at right now. Mr. Kajaria, would you like to take that? What does this mean for non-salaried taxpayers?
Well, really, in a sense, nothing significant, except that, as Mukesh and Sudhir earlier said, that there will be a 25% reduction in the withholding tax rates for all the payments which are made to the non-salaried class, and these are payments like contractors' payments, rental payments, interest payments, professional fees, etc. The non-salaried class of people, which will essentially mean small businessmen or professionals, will get their net receipts slightly higher at this point in time. But one has to remember that pretty soon the installments of advance tax are coming up. So June, September, December and March, these are the 4 installments. Now, of course, depending on whether the business itself remains profitable for this year, MSMEs will have to pay up the tax in advance. So they don't get a net reduction in taxes. They at best get a liquidity to the extent of the reduction in the withholding tax, which they will get for, I think, at best 2 months, if you ask me, each quarter.
Mr. Jhaveri, would you agree that this is just essentially a little bit of liquidity as far as non-salaried employees, non-salaried individuals rather, are concerned, nothing more than that?
Yes, true. So there is, of course, the liquidity part, and the other is on the procedural side. There are extensions of various dates for filings of the returns and assessments, and even VSV in case anyone is proposing to file in for VSV. So there are certain procedural concessions. There's also liquidity. But the overarching, really the objective, I would agree with what Sudhir said, is, the important thing before us, whether it is the business, the professionals, or the salaried class, what binds all of this together is the economic activity. And therefore, with this kind of a package, the objective really needs to be seen and understood as, revival of economic activity, beginning with the MSMEs, which employs perhaps the most, and therefore protecting the employment is perhaps the biggest objective here, alongside a revival of the economic activity. If that is achieved, then the other things really fall into place.
Okay. So that brings us to our next point. What does this mean for corporates? Mr. Butani, what does this mean for companies, for corporates?
So all of these concessions that have been announced today, insofar as the reduction in withholding tax rates are concerned, does not discriminate between a corporate and a non-corporate taxpayer. So simply stated, if you have a corporate taxpayer on the other side, then the corresponding reduction in withholding tax will equally apply. So let's take, for instance, you're paying a commission or a rent, and both the commission and rents and other classes of income are subjected to varied rates of withholding tax, which stand reduced by 25% under the change scenario. It will not really matter whether the withholding tax is on behalf of individuals or on behalf of corporates. So that's really what the sum and substance is for the changes.
Mr. Kapadia, from what I hear, in none of these categories is there anything substantial in terms of extra cash in hand, either for corporates or for salary tax individuals or even non-salaried individuals. It's a minor change in liquidity. Going forward, what would you like to see which actually in this present situation results in, say, salaried individuals having more cash in their hands, either in their salary or what is left of it by the end of the month?
So just Vishnu, just a couple of points. I wouldn't entirely agree that there is nothing for corporates. Let's not forget that the MSMEs, which we just talked about, and the lines of credit and everything else for MSMEs, of course, includes corporates. Many MSMEs are corporates. So I think this artificial distinction between corporates and non-corporates may not be entirely appropriate. So just to bear that in mind. Okay. As I said earlier, it was very clear that to allocate the fiscal deficit amongst the businesses, the MSMEs have been perhaps rightfully given the pride of place. So that's one part. I think the second interesting part is the tax refunds. You see, earlier they had announced that up to 5 lakhs of income tax refunds will be immediately issued, which they did. And for GST and customs, it was without any limits. What you find today is that, interestingly, all non-corporates, not-for-profit, charitable trusts, partnerships, etc., they have announced accelerated refunds of income taxes. Now, in my view, what would have been nicer if the government would have announced the income tax refunds which are due to the taxpayer. Right. Nobody is saying payout in advance of it being due. To corporates as well, because corporates are also in business. And interestingly, as I said earlier, there are many MSMEs who are also corporates, yes, but are not eligible for this accelerated income tax refund announcement. So my submission would be, to your point, that on income tax refunds, what is due to the taxpayers, it would be good to lend this hand of liquidity in times like this. There is no need for government to hold the refunds back, would be the first point. Your other point on, for salaried or anything else, that brings us to the demand side of the equation. We have to wait for the next 2 or 3 days what other announcements are in the offing to give a further impetus to the demand side of the economy.
Mr. Jhaveri, what would you like to see going forward which can add an impetus to the demand side?
So, see, from MSMEs do form, very critical part of the supply chain for the, large corporations, which eventually will be the growth drivers and the growth engines for India. But therefore, whatever we do, this is a starting point that has happened for the MSMEs. I'm sure this is not the only thing. When the COVID discussion started sometime in March, there was a conversation and view that 3 to 6% of the GDP would be the amount required to rebuild this economy. And now we are already talking of 10. Now, whether 10 is adequate or we need more, I think that is something we have to keep testing and seeing what more is required. So in a way, we are on oxygen. There is a need for various kind of segments, whether it is of people or businesses who need that oxygen. There is some oxygen that is now given. Probably some more will be required if this pandemic doesn't die out soon enough.
Right.
And therefore, I think there is opportunity for more to come. And really, in the process, the most important thing to my mind is that we have to think of not just restoring our economy to what it was, but rebuild it and reconstruct it to a new world that we need, which is what I think the PM is talking about.
And that's what the minister also mentioned today, that she's trying to sort of make this into something different. Mr. Kajaria, let me come to you. A last final word over here. A lot of people would say, for example, as far as MSMEs are concerned, that it's not additional liquidity or additional loans that they necessarily required. A large number of MSMEs would require direct cash support. A lot of people would say that going forward, many other non-MSMEs would also require, for example, salary support. In countries like the United Kingdom, in certain sectors, for example, aviation, there is a salary support for individuals up to a certain level. Are we as an economy capable of actually doing that? Do you believe that that should be a step forward?
Well, that is a wish list. I'm not so sure whether our fiscal position can afford a direct picking up of, let's say, salary, because one has to remember that already the government has effected direct benefit transfers to all the people who are below poverty line. And that is as it is, a significant part of the package of the overall package of, say, 20 lakh crores, which has already been accomplished. If you ask me, genuinely what I would have liked is a complete rethinking in the way we collect taxes in our country. For example, UK, USA, Australia does not have any system of internal tax collection, that is the TDS, on anything except salaries. I would have liked to see the same thing here. That is, it's high time we re-looked at this entire system of collecting taxes at source, and I'll tell you why. There are so many arguments in favor. For example, everything is now in an electronic mode. You had a justifiable reason to collect tax at source and also withhold tax at source when you did not have symmetric information and electronic information. Today you have a virtual presence in everybody's life through the collection of data that you have from so many sources, including GST.
Yes.
So there is no real need to really pressure people to fulfill the statutory obligation of collecting taxes for the government and paying them within set timelines. As it is, you have 4 installments of advance tax. But look at the relief that you will give from procedures that all citizens who are taxpayers in this country are burdened with. I can understand there must be a withholding tax for external payments, that is section 195 on non-residents. And you can at best continue it for the salaried class because they are relieved from the burden of calculating advance tax. But for at least now, for the COVID period, when people are not even sure whether at the end of the year they'll be profitable at all, even reduction of the TDS by 25% is too meager. I would have liked a complete abolishing or at least the suspension of all domestic tax collection at least for 1 or 2 years.
Sure. an abolition or a suspension of tax collection for a finite period of time. I think a lot of people would have been hoping for something along those lines. That's not happened. And
correct, and they would feel happy that now the process and the procedure and the burden that they have to do of withholding taxes and collecting taxes, they are relieved and they can focus on reviving their businesses instead.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you, all of you gentlemen, very much for joining us and answering those questions. It's not necessarily good news or welcome news for different segments as yet. Yes, for MSMEs, there are obvious advantages which have been spelt out in so many different schemes, but as far as tax is concerned, or money in the bank at the end of the month, or perhaps even in the beginning of the month when you get your salary, irrespective of which segment you're in, the benefits are not substantive or very substantive at this juncture. Will there be something more which incentivizes the demand in the days going forward? This was just the first of the press conferences. There'll be more tomorrow onwards as well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.